The title of tonight's talk is Tattooing the Heart. Tattooing the Heart. And it comes from actually the title of a book, Tattoos on the Heart by Greg Boyle. I'm going to read you an excerpt later from it. And it actually, his title comes from an exchange that he had with a homie, with a gang member that he was working with in LA some years ago when he wrote this book. This book, I believe, was written in 2010. So I'll read you a brief description of how his title for this book arose. His name is Greg Boyle, and the homies called him G for short. He's a Jesuit priest who worked for 20 years with gang members in LA. Once, after dealing with a particularly exasperating homie named Sharky, I switched my strategy. I decided to catch him in the act of doing the right thing. I can see I've been too harsh and exacting with him, and he is, after all, trying the best he can. I tell him how heroic he is, and how the courage he now exhibits in transforming his life far surpasses the hollow bravery of his past. I tell him he is a giant among men. I mean it. Sharky seems to be thrown off balance by all this and silently stares at me. And then he says, "Damn, G, I'm going to tattoo that on my heart." So, question for us tonight is, what are you tattooing on your heart? In the last few days or so, I've received the gifts of a poem, a song, and this book that have stimulated me to sort of combine words in a little bit a different way. The song is by Mary Chapin Carpenter, and it's entitled "Come See What Love Is For," and I think I'll ask Judy if she can put it up on the website. And the poem is by Marie Howe, and she writes about what the living do. So I've merged the words a bit to come up with this phrase: to see what love is for is what the living do. To see what love is for is what the living do. I was thinking in this season, we get pulled in so many different directions. For those of us who are a little bit older, with maybe some different religious, spiritual traditions from our past, we get pulled maybe towards other holiday traditions that we grew up with. We may get pulled away from ideas or beliefs or relationships that have morphed since our childhood, or since 20 years ago, or since 2 days ago. Sometimes we hear music that alternately seems poignant or disturbing or just irritating. And on the other hand, we're blessed often at this time of year with the reminders of relationships that mean a lot to us or have meant a lot to us. The renewal of old relationships and the addition of new ones. And they're all changing, all moving down different trails. And at some point, each of us in this room chose to show up here with this practice. And whether you've been here 500 nights out of the last 20 years, or if this is your first night, it doesn't really matter. We're here. We're here tonight. So there may be some way in which we want to step away from certain aspects of this season, what our experience of this season. Sometimes we're confused or a little disturbed by what's perceived as excesses, or maybe habits of busyness, or language that can feel divisive. We're not sure about singing any song with Alleluia in it because we wonder if it means we're worshiping something or endorsing a belief no longer held. Well, and our practice then is to remember, well, what's true? And one of the things that's true is this notion about how we're put together, who we are as human beings, how it is that we see what we see and know what we know, what it means to be embodied, and how we thus respond to what we see or notice in the world. And I'm going to run through just a real brief summary of a Buddhist concept called the aggregates. And don't get hung up on the language here, but basically it's the aggregates are a collection, or, and I love this word, a heap of things that are the components of this person, this personality. And very briefly, the first one is referred to as material form, the body. The second one is the feeling that arises when there's contact between the 6 internal organs and 6 external objects. And what that means is the eye sees a sight, internal organ, external object. The ear hears a sound, the nose smells an odor, the tongue tastes, the body touches, the mind contacts a mental object. And every time contact is made between the sense organ and the object, a feeling is created. And it's either pleasant, we move towards it, unpleasant, we want out of here, or it's neutral, we don't really observe it. It's kind of, we're not aware of it really. Each contact between the sensory organ and the object creates this feeling because we're just wired that way. We're basically these biological organisms just responding to our environment, just like that amoeba you studied under the microscope in biology class. The third of these 5 factors is perception. And that's the process that we could say registers and names things. So for example, you see the walls in here and you say they're green. Maybe. Gray-green, whatever you see, depending on your sight. Or it may register the shape of something, or the emotion, an emotion, fear, anxiety, irritation. The fourth factor is called mental formation or volition. This one gets a little bit more complicated, but it's a conditioning that includes emotions that get triggered by an object. So volition moves the mind, urges the mind in a particular direction or toward a specific object. And the last of the 5 factors is consciousness, which just gets the characteristics of the 6 external objects. All of that is to say is that sometimes when we can remember that hearing a sound is simply the hearing isn't us, it's the internal organ perceiving an external sound. So that whether pleasant or unpleasant is the response, it's simply a plethora of conditions that are happening to create a response. Or conversely, it may be that it's not something we don't want, it's something we really want, so we kind of crave it, like chocolate or, a different partner or a new job or, something that we long for that's not here right now. Anytime we want things to be other than the way they are, we are identifying pretty strongly with it, and that strength of that connection varies, of course. But anytime we find ourselves clinging to something else, we wish it were more like that, or we want to get rid of something, or we're confused, we have an idea that this is me. I'm angry. I'm upset. I'm whatever. Each of which, the hearing, the feeling state, the perception, the conditioning, they're not I. They're not me. They're not myself. It's just a temporary grouping of those 5 factors that have come together. The practice here of insight allows us to see this, to see the truth of, it's not me, it's just these factors, these conditions. And in that moment of insight, there's a little bit of a loosening. We're not tangled up in it quite so tightly. We see the conditioning. We see, stimulus, response, conditioning. And there's a little bit of relief in it, a little bit of spaciousness, a little bit of freedom from some tight constraint. And a little bit of joy sometimes, because there's a softening, there's a letting go. And I think it's really helpful to hear how others have interpreted or understood or framed some of these ideas, because it's the way in which we all gain greater understanding of who we are, how we operate. So Thich Nhat Hanh uses the image of going up a ladder. He says, guarding knowledge like this is me, I'm angry, I'm depressed, I'm whatever, is not a good way to understand. Understanding means to throw away your knowledge. Let go of your viewpoints. You have to be able to transcend your knowledge the way people climb a ladder. The way of understanding is always letting go of our views, climbing the ladder, letting go of our views in order to transcend. So you can just notice if that rings a bell for you, or you go, no, not so much. It's okay. The wisdom is to take what seems worthy, wholesome, understandable, and let the rest go. Don't worry about it. There's a female Buddhist teacher whose name I won't begin to try to pronounce, but she taught in 20th century Thailand, so not that long ago. And this is what she says around these concepts. She says, the knowing that lets go of knowing is very beneficial. There's no getting stuck, no grabbing hold of your views. If the knowledge is right, you let it go. If the knowledge is wrong, you let it go. This is called knowing the letting go of knowing without getting entangled. Knowing the letting go of knowing without getting entangled. This kind of knowing keeps the mind from latching on to whatever's arising. As soon as you know it or see it, you let it go. So the mind just keeps on staying empty, empty of mental prefabrications, empty of thoughts, empty of every sort of illusion that could entangle the mind. Maybe this one is a little easier to get our hands around. This is Hafiz, the Persian poet. He says, now that all your worry has proved such an unlucrative business, why not find a better job? Joanna Macy, who's a Buddhist teacher and environmentalist activist, says, the way we define and delimit the self is arbitrary. We can place it between our ears and have it looking out from our eyes, or we can widen it to include the air that we breathe. Or, at other moments, we can cast its boundaries farther to include the oxygen-giving trees and plankton, our external lungs. And beyond them, the web of life in which we are all sustained. And then Teresa, who is a wonderful teacher, I had the opportunity to sit with on retreat last month. She says, maybe it's a matter of having a long-term view, to be with life as it is in this moment, allowing any wave of pain or confusion to come and go with a wave of idealism. Learning to accept and allow response to emerge from that acceptance are not in opposition. There can be a letting go and an equanimity, and there can be vigorous work to transform suffering. It may seem that there's a conflict between non-attachment and responding appropriately, but in practice, each informs the other. When it's time to act, then act. When it's time to let it be, then let it be. What guides our response is mindfulness. When awareness is distilled by wisdom, all distinctions dissolve. The dualities of action, inaction, wise, deluded, you, me, are revealed to be mere appearances. She talks a lot about the radiant heart. So she says, right in the midst of every condition is the radiant heart. There is no other field of awakening than what unfolds right here, right now. This is the emptiness that opens into intimacy with all that is. When we realize this, we see that it's not a question of helping others, because at the deepest level of reality, there are no others. We are all connected. Poet David White from the British Isles has this to say. He says, the only choice we have as we mature is how we inhabit our vulnerability. How we inhabit our vulnerability. How we become larger, more courageous, and more compassionate through our intimacy with disappearance. Through our intimacy with disappearance. And in a few moments I'm going to close with a story from this book, but it ties into this next part, which is from the Dalai Lama. And he talks about this concept of universal responsibility and the good heart. And he said that, I believe that the embracing of a particular religion does not mean the rejection of another religion or one's own community. Those of you who have embraced Buddhism should not cut yourself off from your own society. You should continue to live within your community and with its members. This is not only for your sake, but for others also. Because by rejecting your community, you cannot benefit others, which actually is the basic aim of religion. And then from Dr. Seuss. Until we have seen someone's darkness, we don't really know who they are. Until we have forgiven someone's darkness, we don't really know what love is. So, tattoos on the heart. Well, just an excerpt. So again, the story of the Jesuit priest, Greg Boyle, G, as he's called by his homies, working with gang members in LA, over 1,100 gangs, over 86,000 young men. He has worked with them for more than 20 years. His book is subtitled The Power of Boundless Compassion. And it illustrates, I think, particularly well this line from Hafiz. The heart is a 1,000-stringed instrument that can only be tuned with love. Here's one of his stories. By the way, it's not whitewashed. This is his language, the language. Leon Dufour, a world-renowned Jesuit theologian, a year before he died at 99, confided to someone who was caring for him, "I've written so many books about God, but after all that, what do I really know? I think in the end, God is the person you're talking to, the one right in front of you." A mantra I use often, says the author, to keep me focused on delight in the person in front of me, comes from an unlikely place. I found it in Jesus' words to the man nailed next to him. He essentially says, "This day with me, paradise." It's not just a promise of things to come, it's a promise of the here and now. On this day, in fact, paradise. Thich Nhat Hanh writes, "Our true home is the present moment. The miracle is not to walk on water. The miracle is to walk on the green earth in this present moment." The ancient desert fathers, when they were disconsolate and without hope, would repeat one word over and over as kind of a soothing mantra. And the word wasn't Jesus, it wasn't God, it wasn't love. The word was today, because it kept them where they needed to be. So I come back from a speaking trip, and Marcus is sitting there at the reception area. Gus at the front desk tells me, "He's been waiting for you 3 days. Marcus greets me, and he's brimming with news. "While you were gone, my son was born." "Nice going, me. Tell me, when was he born?" "On his birthday." Wow, I think, what are the chances of that happening? God right here today in the person in front of me. Joy beyond beholding this day, paradise. Before they tore down the projects in Pico Gardens and then rebuilt them, the two identifying locales within them were the first and second playgrounds. They were ostensibly areas for kids to play in, although the jungle gyms looked like hand-me-downs from Mogadishu, and the patch of lawn never deepened in color past yellow. "Meet you at the second playground" was commonly heard. Or, "They crept in at the first playground and started blasting" was also a recurring refrain. On a summer night, I'm on my bike, and I settle in the heart of the second playground. It's still light outside, and soon I'm surrounded by homies. I straddle the bike and I listen to the homies bagging on one another, kidding one another endlessly, truth be told. This is the main occupation of all the gang members. There are 8 who ultimately gather here. The banter is fast, and no prisoners are taken. In a flash, one of the homies, Minor, points up to a telephone wire perched above the apartments. "Look, gee, it's an owl." "Yeah, damn, a fucking owl," says another. "In the project," says a third, setting our collective volume to a hush, indicating that some cathedral has just been entered. Sure enough, there is the largest owl imaginable resting on this telephone wire, just above the store. We stand in a straight line, eyeing this creature that has chosen to visit the poorest, most owlless sector in LA. Pigeons and mice are generally our wildlife. Mouths agape, the silence is maintained only briefly as Psycho, one of the homies, turns to Minor with a whisper, "Get the gauge." "Nope," Gonzo intervenes, reaching over and touching Minor on the arm. "Nope," says Gonzo, with the heft of some tribal leader. "Let him be." No one wants to speak too loudly or make any sudden moves. Even when it does occur to someone in the group to say something, no one takes his eye off this bird. "It's a sign," says one of them. "From God," says another. "What's it mean, G?" says Minor. I lean into him but with a stage whisper so all can hear. It's God saying, give up your weapons, love your enemies, and work for peace. The unified moan nearly sends our unexpected owl packing. You think everything means that. Uh-oh, Gonzo's on to me. There we stand as others join our vigil in the temple worship of this massive animal. Silence prevails, as no church service I've ever seen commands, until this astonishing owl opens its wings and takes off, suspecting no doubt that Psycho and his gauge can't be restrained forever. And he is gone in a majestic flapping and a slow motion gliding, disappearing from view behind the gigantic tower of the corn factory fronting the projects. Today, this day, an owl, second playground. Together we breathe this all in, and it seems a paradise to us. The heart is 1,000-stringed instrument that can only be tuned by love. So let's just close with a short reflection tonight. So just get comfortable in your chair. And see what's in the mind, body, heart right now. Welcoming it all. Nothing left out. Listening to some words by Hafiz. With that moon language, admit something. Everyone you see, you say to them, love me. Of course, you do not do this out loud. Otherwise, someone would call the cops. Still, though, think about this. This great pull in us to connect. Why not become the one who lives with a full moon in each eye, that is always saying with that sweet moon language what every other eye in this world is dying to hear? Thank you for your listening, for your practice, for your presence. Have a safe, peaceful, easeful holiday season.